Hey everybody, I'll go ahead and give everybody a second to get back on. Welcome to May. Welcome to level 5 of Jumanji. So, just a quick reminder that today we are going to be going through chapter 7 of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. We are starting with basically what happened the last time was they finally caught the sea monster that they've been looking for. And it is so fast that it's literally running circles around the Abraham Lincoln, which is the ship that they're on. It's not close enough for them to harpoon or do any damage to it. Finally, when they get the idea to shoot it with a cannon, the cannon isn't even powerful enough to damage it. It just bounces off. So they finally crept up on it and actually crashed into it. And it knocked the professor off of the ship. So that's where we're starting from today. So let's go ahead and get started. A whale of unknown species. Though I was startled by the unexpected descent, I at least have a good, clear memory of my sensations during it. At first, I was dragged down about 20 feet. I'm a good swimmer without claiming the equal of other authors such as Byron or Edgar Allan Poe, who are masters of the sport, and that nosedive didn't cause me to lose my head. 2 vigorous kicks of the heel brought me back to the surface of the sea. My first concern was to look for the frigate. Did the crew see me go overboard? Was the Abraham Lincoln tacking about? Would Commander Farragut put a longboat out to sea? Had I any hope of being rescued? It was extremely dark. I glimpsed a black shape vanishing eastward, where its running lights were fading out in the distance. It was the frigate. I felt I was done for. Help! Help! I shouted, swimming desperately towards the Abraham Lincoln. My clothes were weighing me down. The water glued them to my body. They were paralyzing my movements. I was sinking. I was suffocating. Help! This is the last shout I gave. My mouth filled up with water. I was floundering, being dragged into the depths. Suddenly, a pair of energetic hands grabbed my clothes. I felt myself being pulled forcefully back to the surface of the sea, and yes, I heard these words being spoken in my ear. If Master would be so kind as to lean on my shoulder, Master will swim with much greater ease. I reached out and clutched my loyal Conseil by the arm. You, I said, it's you! The same, Conseil replied, and at Master's command. Did that collision throw you overboard along with me? Not at all. But being in my master's employ, I followed Master. A fine lad that thought it was only natural. What about the frigate? The frigate, Conseil replied, rolling over on his back. I think Master had better not depend on that to any great extent. What do you mean? I mean that just as I jumped overboard, the men at the helm shouted out, Our propeller and rudder have been smashed. Smashed? Yes, smashed by the monster's tusks. I believe it's the only injury the Abraham Lincoln has sustained. But what's inconvenient for us is that the ship can no longer steer. Then we're done for. Maybe, Conseil replied serenely. However, we still have a few hours in front of us, and a few hours one can do a good many things. Conseil's unflappable composure cheered me up. I swam more energetically, but I was hampered by the clothes as restricted as a cloak made of lead, so I was managing with only the greatest difficulty. Conseil noticed this. If Master will allow me, I'll do a little cutting, he said. And he slipped open a little clasp knife under my clothes, slitting them from top to bottom with one swift stroke. Next, he briskly undressed me, while I swam for the two of us. Then I did Conseil the same favor, and we continued to navigate side by side. But our circumstances weren't any less dreadful. Maybe they had not seen us go overboard. Even if they had, the frigate, being outdone by its rudder, couldn't return to the leeward towards us, so its longboat's the only thing that we could rely on. Conseil had coolly reasoned out his theory and laid his plans accordingly. An amazing character, my boy. In mid-ocean, this stoic lad seemed right at home. We concluded that our only chance of being rescued was to be picked up by the Abraham Lincoln's longboats. So we had to take steps to wait for them as long as we could. Consequently, I decided to divide our energies or we won't both get tired at the same time. And this was the arrangement. One of us lay on his back, staying motionless with his arms and legs folded and outstretched. The other would swim and propel his partner forward. This towing role was to last no longer than 10 minutes, and by relieving each other this way, we could stay afloat for some hours, maybe even until daybreak. Our chances were slim, but hope springs eternal in the human breast. Besides, there were two of us, and I must admit, as unlikely as it sounds, that even if I'd wanted to destroy all of my illusions, even if I'd been willing to give up in despair, I couldn't have. The cetacean that rammed our frigate wasn't around 11 o'clock at night. So I was figuring on 8 hours of swimming until sunrise. It was hard work, but still doable thanks to our relieving each other. The sea was pretty smooth and barely tired us. Now and then I tried to peer through the dense gloom, which was broken only by the phosphorescent flickering of our own movements. I looked at the shimmering ripples breaking over my hand, glistening sheets spotted with patches of bluish gray. You would have sworn that we'd plunged under a pool of quicksilver. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, I got tremendously tired. My limbs stiffened in the grip of intense cramps. Conseil had to keep me going, and attend to our self-preservation became his sole responsibility. I soon heard the poor lad gasping. He was taking short, hurried breaths, and I knew he could not hold out much longer. Go on, I told him. Leave master behind, he replied. Never. I'll drown before he does. Just then, past the fringes and the large cloud the wind was driving eastward, the moon appeared. The surface of the sea sparkled under her rays. That wholesome light rekindled our strength. I held my head high again. My eyes darted into every corner of the horizon. I spotted the frigate. It was 5 miles away from us, no more than a dark, barely visible mast. But as for longboats, there wasn't a single one in sight. I tried to call out, but it was no use at such a distance. My swollen lips wouldn't let any sound come through. Conseil could still enunciate a few words, and I heard him shout again and again, "Help! Help!" Holding on still for a second, we listened. And it may have been the ringing in my ears from their filling with congested blood, but it seemed to me that Conseil's shout had gotten an answer back. "Did you hear that?" I mumbled. "Yes, yes." And Conseil sent another desperate plea into space. This time there couldn't be any mistake. A human voice answered us. Was it the same voice of some poor devil left in mid-ocean, another victim of the collision suffered by our ship? Or was it the frigate's longboats, hailing us out of the gloom? Conseil made one more crowing effort. Bracing his hands against my shoulders while I offered resistance with my last ounce of strength, he raised himself half out of the water and fell back exhausted. "What did you see?" "I saw," he muttered. I saw, but we mustn't talk. Save our strength." What had he seen? Then, Lord knows why, thoughts of the monster came into my head for the first time. But even so, that voice? Gone were the days when the Jonas could take refuge in the bellies of the whales. Nevertheless, Conseil kept towing me. Sometimes he lifted his chin, looked straight ahead, and shouted requests for directions, which was answered by a voice getting closer and closer. I could barely hear it. I had reached the end of my strength. My fingers gave out, my hands were no help to me. My mouth opened convulsively, filling with brine. Its coldness ran through me. I raised my head one last time, then I collapsed. Right that instant, something hard banged into me. I held onto it. Then I felt myself being pulled upwards, back to the surface of the water. My chest caved in and I fainted. I must have come to quickly, because somebody was massaging me so energetically that it left furrows in my flesh. I half opened my eyes. "Conseil!" I muttered. "Did master ring for me?" Conseil replied. Just then, in the last light of the moon, she gravitated towards the horizon. I spotted a face that was not Conseil. A face I recognized immediately. "Ned!" I exclaimed. "None other, sir, and still trying to claim my prize," the Canadian replied. "You were thrown overboard after the frigate's collision?" "Yes, Professor, but I was luckier than you in that I managed to set foot on the floating islet." "Islet?" "Or, in other words, on our gigantic narwhal." "What do you mean, Ned?" "I mean, as soon as I realized why my harpoon got blunted and couldn't puncture its hide." "Why, Ned, why?" "Because, Professor, this beast is made of boilerplate steel. And now I need to get a good grip on myself, carefully reconstruct my experience, and personally double-check every statement I make." The Canadian's last words caused a sudden upheaval in my brain. I swiftly hoisted myself up to the half-submerged creature, or object, that was now serving as our refuge. I tested it with my foot. Obviously, it was some hard, impregnable substance, not the soft matter that makes up the bodies of our big marine mammals. But this hard substance could have been a bony carapace, or a shell, like those that covered certain prehistoric animals, and I might have left it at that, and classified this monster among such amphibious reptiles such as turtles or alligators. Well, hardly. The blackish back supporting me was smooth and polished, without overlapping scales. On impact, it made a metallic sound, and as incredible as it may seem, it appeared, I swear, to be made of riveted plates. No doubt was possible. This animal, this monster, this natural phenomenon that had both puzzled the scientific community and boggled the minds of seamen in both hemispheres was now revealed to be an even more astounding phenomenon, a phenomenon made by human hands. Even if I discovered some fabulous mythological creature actually existed, it wouldn't have given me such a mental jolt. It's easy enough to accept the prodigious things that can come from our Creator, but to find, all at once, under your very eyes, that the impossible had been mysteriously accomplished by man himself, it was a staggering thought. But there was no question now. We were laying back in some sort of underwater boat, which, so far as I could judge, boasted both the shape of an immense steel fish. Ned Land was clear on his views in the matter. Conseil and I could only fall in line behind him. But then I said, wouldn't this contraption have some propulsion units and a crew to operate them? You would think, the harpooner replied. Yet for 3 hours I've lived on this floating island and it hasn't shown a sign of life. The boat hasn't moved. No, Professor Arnaud. It just rides the waves and doesn't do a blessed thing. But we definitely know it can travel at great speed. Now then, it needs an engine to generate the speed and a mechanic to run the engine. Therefore, I conclude we are saved. Humph, Ned Land put in, his tone indicating reservations. But then, as if to take my side in the argument, the water started bubbling to the rear as the strange submersible, whose drive mechanism was obviously a propeller, had begun to move the boat forward. We had barely enough time to hang on to the topside, which now emerged 2.5 feet above the water. Luckily, its speed was not excessive. So long as it navigates horizontally, Ned Land muttered, I have no complaints. But if it gets the urge to dive, I wouldn't give $2 for my hide. The Canadian could have named a far lower price, so it was essential to make contact with whatever beings were confined inside the plating of this machine. I searched its surface for an opening or hatch, a manhole to use the official term, but the lines of the rivets had been firmly driven into the sheet iron joints and were straight and uniform. What's more, the moon vanished at this point and left us in absolute darkness. We had to wait until daylight to find some way of getting inside the underwater boat. Hence, our lives were totally in the hand of the mysterious helmsman steering the submersible. And if it made a dive, we were done for. But aside from that, I didn't doubt the possibility of us making contact with them. In fact, they didn't produce their own air. They inevitably had to pay periodic visits to the surface of the ocean to replenish their oxygen supply. Consequently, there had to be an opening that put the boat's interior in contact with the outside air. As for our being rescued by Commander Farragut, there we were to abandon all hope. We were being carried westward, and I estimate our comparative moderate speed reached 12 miles an hour. The propeller churned the waves with mathematical steadiness, sometimes emerging above the water and spraying phosphorescent lights to get to great heights. Near 4 o'clock in the morning, the submersible was picking up speed. We could barely cope with the dizzying rush, and the waves pummeled us with everything they had. Luckily, Ned's hands found a mooring line fastened to the top side of the sheet iron back, and we all could hang on tight. Finally, that long night was over. My faulty memory won't let me recall all of my impressions of it. A single detail sticks in my mind. Several times, during various lulls of sea and wind, I thought I heard faint sounds, fleeting harmonies produced by distant musical chords. Was that the secret behind the underwater navigation that the whole world vainly tried to explain? What beings lived inside this strange boat? What mechanical force allowed it to move about with such prodigious speed? Daylight appeared. Morning mists surrounded us, but soon broke apart. I was able to carefully examine the hull, whose topside formed a sort of horizontal platform, when I was sinking little by little. Oh, damnation, Ned Land shouted, stamping his foot on the resonant sheet iron. Open up, you unsociable navigators! But it was hard to make yourself heard above the deafening beats of the propeller. Luckily, the submerging movement stopped. Suddenly, from inside of the boat, we heard the sound of iron fastening being forcefully pushed aside. One of the steel plates flew up, and a man appeared, gave a peculiar yell, and instantly vanished. A few seconds later, 8 strapping fellows appeared silently, their faces like masks, dragging us into their terrible machine. Here's the illustration for today. Ned Land, Professor Arnaud, and Conseil, all on top of the submarine that they thought was a sea monster. So that'll be it for today. Looks like it's just Jerry today, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll go ahead and pick it up again on Monday. So have a good weekend. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you then. Peace.